What if I told you that the most important phone call in ending a war between America and Iran did not come from the White House, did not come from the Pentagon, and did not come from any European capital? It came from Islamabad. It came from Pakistan, a country that most Western analysts had written off as a declining power, a troubled state struggling with its own internal problems. And yet, in the most dangerous moment of the 21st century, when American and Iranian missiles were literally in the air, when the world stood on the brink of a catastrophic conflict that could have engulfed the entire Middle East, it was Pakistan that stepped into the darkness and pulled both nations back from the edge. This is the story they do not want you to know. This is the story of how Pakistan became America's secret weapon to end the Iran war. To understand this story, you need to understand what happened in the first week of January 2020, because that week changed everything. That week brought the world closer to World War III than any moment since the Cuban Missile Crisis, and almost nobody truly understands what happened behind closed doors. On January 3, 2020, the United States conducted a drone strike at Baghdad International Airport. The target was Qasem Soleimani, the commander of Iran's Quds Force, the most powerful military figure in Iran after the supreme leader himself. Soleimani was not just a general. He was a legend. He had spent decades building Iran's network of proxy forces across the Middle East. He had orchestrated campaigns in Syria, in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Yemen. He was the architect of Iran's regional strategy, the man who had turned Iran from an isolated revolutionary state into a dominant regional power. Western intelligence agencies considered him responsible for the deaths of hundreds of American soldiers through the improvised explosive devices his network supplied to Iraqi militias. He was on every target list. But for years, American presidents had refused to authorize his killing because they understood the consequences would be catastrophic. President Donald Trump made a different calculation. Acting on intelligence that Soleimani was planning imminent attacks on American personnel, Trump authorized the strike. At 1 a.m. Baghdad time, a MQ-9 Reaper drone fired missiles at a convoy leaving the airport. Soleimani was killed instantly, along with Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, the leader of Kataib Hezbollah, one of Iran's most powerful Iraqi proxy groups. The world held its breath. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, declared that harsh revenge awaited the criminals who killed Soleimani. Iranian officials promised retaliation that would be proportional, that would be direct, that would strike American interests in ways that America could not ignore. The rhetoric was unlike anything heard from Tehran in decades. This was not about proxy warfare anymore. This was about direct confrontation between two nations that had been enemies for 40 years. What happened next brought the world to the precipice. On January 8, 2020, Iran launched Operation Martyr Soleimani. At approximately 1:30 a.m. local time, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps fired more than a dozen ballistic missiles at two military bases in Iraq housing American forces. Al-Assad Air Base in Anbar Province and a facility near Erbil in Iraqi Kurdistan were struck by missiles launched directly from Iranian territory. This was unprecedented. Iran had never before launched a direct military attack on American forces from its own soil. For 40 years, Iran had worked through proxies, through deniable assets, through shadow networks. Now they were attacking openly with their own missiles, from their own launch sites, with their own flag on the operation. American early warning systems detected the launches within minutes. American forces at the targeted bases had received warning and had taken shelter. The missiles struck. Structures were destroyed, or craters pockmarked the bases. But when the dust settled, the initial reports indicated that no Americans had been killed. This was later revised when dozens of soldiers were diagnosed with traumatic brain injuries from the blasts, injuries that President Trump controversially dismissed as headaches. But in those first critical hours, the message was clear. Iran had struck directly, but they had not killed Americans. This was the moment of maximum danger. American military assets across the Middle East were on highest alert. Aircraft carriers were positioned. Fighter jets were armed and ready. Bomber squadrons were prepared. The question that consumed Washington in those hours was simple but terrifying. Was this the end of Iranian retaliation, or was this just the beginning? And what should America do in response? year, President Trump had to make a decision that could determine whether millions of people lived or died. If he ordered a counterstrike on Iranian territory, the escalation would become uncontrollable. Iran would respond again. America would respond again. Oil facilities would burn. The Strait of Hormuz would close. 20% of the world's oil supply would be cut off. Hezbollah would launch rockets at Israel. The entire Middle East would ignite. And behind all of this loomed the specter of Iran's nuclear program. A cornered Iran, facing regime survival, might make decisions about weapons of mass destruction that would change history forever. This is where Pakistan enters the story. And this is where you need to understand something that most people do not understand about Pakistan's unique position in the world. Pakistan is one of the only countries on earth that maintains deep relationships with both the United States and Iran. Pakistan is a major non-NATO ally of the United States. It has worked with American intelligence for decades. It was the staging ground for the war in Afghanistan. It has received billions in American military and economic assistance. American and Pakistani generals know each other by first name. American and Pakistani intelligence officers have shared operations, shared targets, shared secrets. But Pakistan also shares a 900-kilometer border with Iran. Pakistani and Iranian civilizations have been intertwined for thousands of years. The Persian language influenced Urdu. Persian poetry is treasured in Pakistan. Millions of Pakistani Shia Muslims look to Iranian religious authorities for guidance. Foreign trade flows across the border. Gas pipelines have been planned. Despite American pressure, Pakistan has maintained diplomatic and economic relationships with Tehran that few other American partners would dare to maintain. This dual relationship made Pakistan uniquely positioned in January 2020. Pakistan could talk to both sides. Pakistan could understand both sides. Pakistan could deliver messages that neither side could deliver directly. And most importantly, Pakistan could be trusted by both sides not to be playing games, not to be seeking advantage, but to be genuinely working to prevent catastrophe. The man at the center of this effort was Imran Khan, Pakistan's prime minister. Khan had come to power in 2018 on a platform of independent foreign policy. He had criticized Pakistan's traditional subservience to American interests. He had advocated for better relationships with neighbors, including Iran. He had spoken publicly about the dangers of regional conflict and the need for dialogue. When the Soleimani crisis erupted, Khan saw an opportunity and a responsibility. Pakistan could not be a bystander while a war erupted on its border. What followed was a remarkable diplomatic offensive that most of the world never saw. Pakistani diplomatic channels went into overdrive. Pakistani military and intelligence officials reached out to their American counterparts. Pakistani diplomats reached out to Iranian counterparts. The message was consistent. Both sides needed to step back. Both sides needed to understand the other's position. Both sides needed an off-ramp from this escalation before it was too late. The critical Pakistani intervention came in the hours immediately after the Iranian missile strikes. In those hours, the American national security apparatus was divided. Some officials argued for an immediate military response. Iran had attacked American bases directly. American credibility was on the line. If America did not respond with overwhelming force, Iran would be emboldened. America's allies in the region, Saudi Arabia and Israel and the Gulf states, would lose confidence in American protection. The message had to be clear: attack America and face destruction. But other officials argued for restraint. No Americans had been killed. Iran had clearly calibrated its attack to avoid mass casualties. This might be Iran's way of saving face while actually seeking to end the cycle of escalation. If America struck back, we or Iran would have no choice but to strike again. The logic of escalation would take over. Rational decision-making would give way to action and reaction, strike and counterstrike, until both nations were at war. In the midst of this debate, Pakistani channels delivered crucial intelligence and crucial messages. Pakistani officials communicated to their American counterparts what they were hearing from Tehran. Iran was looking for this to be over. Iran had made its statement. Iran had demonstrated that it could strike American bases directly. Iranian honor, in their view, had been satisfied. But Iran could not accept further American strikes without response. If America struck again, Iran would strike again, and the next round would not be calibrated to avoid casualties. This message was critical because it helped American decision-makers understand Iranian intentions. In moments of crisis, the most dangerous factor is uncertainty. When you do not know what your enemy intends, you must assume the worst. You must prepare for the worst. And preparing for the worst often means acting in ways that make the worst more likely. Pakistani channels helped reduce that uncertainty. They helped American officials understand that Iran was not seeking a war. Iran was seeking a way out. At the same time, Pakistani officials were delivering messages in the other direction. They communicated to Iranian officials the American perspective. America was under domestic political pressure to respond. American credibility was perceived to be on the line. But there were voices in Washington arguing for restraint. True, if Iran signaled clearly that its retaliation was complete, those voices would have ammunition. But if Iran continued to threaten, continued to launch attacks, the pressure for American military action would become irresistible. This shuttle diplomacy, conducted through military channels, intelligence channels, and diplomatic channels simultaneously, helped both sides understand each other's red lines and each other's off-ramps. It helped create the space for de-escalation that both sides, in their hearts, desperately wanted. President Trump's response, delivered in a televised address from the White House on January 8th, reflected this understanding. Trump announced that no Americans had been harmed in the Iranian attacks. He announced new economic sanctions on Iran, but crucially, he did not announce military strikes. He declared that the United States was ready and prepared to take whatever action was necessary, but he emphasized that the United States would embrace peace with all who seek it. This was the off-ramp. This was the signal that the cycle of escalation was over. Iranian officials, receiving the message through multiple channels, including Pakistani intermediaries, understood the signal. Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif tweeted that Iran had taken and concluded proportionate measures in self-defense. The word concluded was critical. It signaled that Iran was done. It signaled that there would be no more strikes. It signaled that both sides could step back. The world breathed again. The war that had seemed inevitable hours earlier did not happen. The missiles stopped flying. The aircraft carriers did not launch their strikes. The bombers returned to base. The crisis that had brought the world to the brink passed into history as a close call, a near miss, a moment when disaster was averted by the thinnest of margins. But the story does not end there, because the Pakistani role in January 2020 was not an isolated incident. It was part of a longer pattern of Pakistani mediation between America and Iran that stretches back years and continues to this day. Consider the context. For decades, American policy toward Iran has been dominated by confrontation, sanctions, covert operations, support for regime opponents, military threats. American presidents from both parties have treated Iran as an implacable enemy, a rogue state, a member of the axis of evil. But this confrontational approach has consistently failed to achieve American objectives. Iran's nuclear program has advanced despite sanctions. Iran's regional influence has grown despite isolation. Iran's government has remained in power despite pressure. The fundamental problem is that America has no diplomatic relationship with Iran. Since the embassy seizure in 1979, America and Iran have had no formal diplomatic ties. American and Iranian officials cannot simply pick up the phone and talk. Every communication must go through intermediaries. Every message must be decoded for hidden meanings. Every signal must be interpreted through layers of mistrust and suspicion built up over 40 years. This is where Pakistan becomes essential. Pakistan provides a channel of communication that would otherwise not exist. Pakistani officials can travel to Tehran. Iranian officials can travel to Islamabad. Such messages can be delivered face-to-face with nuance and context that written communications cannot convey. Pakistani officials can explain American thinking to Iranians in ways that Iranians can understand. They can explain Iranian thinking to Americans in ways that Americans can understand. They can identify areas of potential agreement that neither side can see when looking directly at each other through decades of hostility. This role became even more important during the Trump administration's maximum pressure campaign against Iran. Beginning in 2018, when Trump withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal, America imposed the most severe sanctions in history on Iran. The goal was to bring Iran to its knees, to force it to negotiate a new agreement that addressed not just nuclear issues, but also ballistic missiles and regional behavior. But the maximum pressure campaign created maximum danger. As Iranian oil exports collapsed, as its economy strangled, Iran faced an existential choice: submit to American demands, which no proud nation could easily do, or fight back, which risked catastrophic war. Iran chose to fight back in measured ways. It began attacking oil tankers in the Persian Gulf. It shot down an American drone. It attacked Saudi oil facilities in a devastating strike that temporarily cut Saudi production in half. Each of these incidents brought the risk of war, and in each of these incidents, Pakistani channels played a role in preventing escalation. Prime Minister Imran Khan understood that Pakistan could not afford a war between America and Iran. Such a war would destabilize Pakistan's western border. It would send millions of refugees into Pakistani territory. It would disrupt energy supplies that Pakistan desperately needs. It would force Pakistan to choose between its American alliance and its Iranian neighbor, a choice that Pakistan cannot afford to make. Pakistani self-interest aligned perfectly with global interest in preventing war. In September 2019, just months before the Soleimani crisis, Imran Khan traveled to New York for the United Nations General Assembly. He held meetings with both Trump and Iranian President Hassan Rouhani. He attempted to arrange a direct meeting between Trump and Rouhani, which would have been the first meeting between American and Iranian leaders since 1979. That meeting did not happen. But the effort demonstrated Pakistan's willingness to take risks for peace and its unique ability to talk to both sides. Khan met with Trump at the United Nations. He explained the Iranian perspective, the sense of humiliation Iranians felt at American sanctions, the domestic political constraints that prevented Iranian leaders from appearing weak, the genuine desire for dialogue that existed beneath the hostile rhetoric. Trump, whatever his critics might say, was genuinely interested in making a deal with Iran. He had said repeatedly that he wanted to talk, that he wanted a better deal than the nuclear agreement his predecessor had signed. Khan's message resonated. Khan also met with Rouhani and Zarif. He explained the American perspective, the political pressures Trump faced, the genuine concerns about Iranian regional behavior, the possibility that sanctions relief could come quickly if Iran demonstrated good faith. Rouhani was skeptical but willing to listen. The Iranians trusted Khan in a way they did not trust other intermediaries. Pakistan was not Saudi Arabia, which Iran viewed as an enemy. Pakistan was not the European Union, which Iran viewed as weak and unreliable. Pakistan was a neighbor, a fellow Muslim country, a nation that understood Iranian culture and Iranian concerns. The mediation effort in September 2019 did not produce a breakthrough, but it laid groundwork that proved essential when the Soleimani crisis erupted 4 months later. Relationships had been built, communication channels had been established, trust had been developed. When the missiles started flying in January 2020, Pakistani officials did not have to start from scratch. They could pick up conversations that had already begun. There is another dimension to Pakistan's role that is even less understood. Pakistan is a nuclear weapons state. It possesses one of the fastest-growing nuclear arsenals in the world. Pakistani nuclear scientists and military officers understand nuclear weapons in ways that few countries do, and Pakistan has a profound interest in preventing nuclear proliferation in its region. Iran's nuclear program is the central concern driving American policy toward Iran. America fears that Iran will develop nuclear weapons, that nuclear weapons in Iranian hands would destabilize the Middle East, that it would trigger a regional arms race, that it would empower Iranian aggression, that it might eventually result in nuclear terrorism or nuclear war. These fears have driven decades of American policy. They drove the negotiations that produced the nuclear deal in 2015. They drove the maximum pressure campaign when Trump withdrew from that deal. Pakistan, as a nuclear weapons state, has a unique perspective on this issue. Pakistan understands the security calculations that drive nations to seek nuclear weapons. Pakistan sought nuclear weapons because it faced an existential threat from India, a much larger neighbor that had defeated Pakistan in multiple wars and had its own nuclear arsenal. Pakistan understands that nations do not give up nuclear programs unless their fundamental security concerns are addressed. Pakistani officials have communicated this understanding to their American counterparts. Simply demanding that Iran abandon its nuclear program will not work if Iran continues to feel threatened. American military bases surround Iran. American allies in the region threaten Iran. American sanctions strangle Iran. In this environment, Iran has powerful incentives to seek the ultimate deterrent. If America wants to truly resolve the nuclear issue, it must address the underlying security concerns that drive Iranian behavior. This message is uncomfortable for American policymakers who prefer to view Iran as simply a rogue state that must be coerced into compliance. But it reflects a sophisticated understanding of nuclear dynamics that Pakistan has gained through its own experience. And it points toward diplomatic solutions that might actually work. Solutions that address Iranian security concerns while also addressing American and regional concerns about Iranian behavior. The Pakistan Channel has also been used to discuss practical confidence-building measures that could reduce tensions. Ideas have been floated about deconfliction mechanisms in the Persian Gulf to prevent accidental clashes between American and Iranian naval forces. Ideas have been discussed about humanitarian exceptions to sanctions that could reduce Iranian suffering without providing resources for Iranian military activities. Ideas have been explored about prisoner exchanges and other gestures that could build trust incrementally. None of these efforts have produced a comprehensive breakthrough. The fundamental conflict between America and Iran remains unresolved. Iran continues to advance its nuclear program. America continues to impose sanctions. Both sides continue to view each other with deep suspicion. The risk of war remains. But the fact that war has not happened, the fact that the Soleimani crisis did not escalate into a broader conflict, the fact that both sides have remained at the negotiating table even when negotiations seemed hopeless, owes something to Pakistan's quiet diplomacy. The channel has remained open. The messages have continued to flow. And when the next crisis comes, as it inevitably will, Pakistan will again be positioned to play its unique role. There is a broader lesson here about how the world really works. In the public imagination, international relations is dominated by great powers: America and China, America and Russia, the United States and its European allies. Small and medium powers are seen as bit players, following the lead of the major powers, unable to shape events in meaningful ways. But the reality is more complex. In a world of entrenched conflicts and frozen relationships, middle powers with unique diplomatic positions can punch far above their weight. They can deliver messages that great powers cannot deliver directly. They can propose solutions that great powers cannot propose without losing face. They can serve as bridges across divides that have existed for generations. Pakistan is one of these middle powers. Its unique position, allied with America but friendly with Iran, nuclear-armed but non-aligned with major power blocs, Islamic but not Arab, South Asian but deeply connected to the Middle East, gives it diplomatic capabilities that no other country possesses. Pakistani leaders have understood this and have been willing to use it. This is not to say that Pakistan is a purely benevolent actor. Pakistan has its own interests, its own agendas, its own flaws. Pakistan's relationship with militant groups has caused enormous problems. Pakistan's internal instability raises questions about its reliability as a partner. Pakistan's economic weaknesses limit its capacity to sustain diplomatic initiatives over time. But none of this changes the fundamental fact that Pakistan has played a crucial role in preventing a war that would have been catastrophic for everyone. The story of Pakistan as America's secret weapon is a story about the hidden wiring of international relations. It is a story about how diplomacy really works, not through grand summits and public declarations, but through quiet conversations, trusted intermediaries, and carefully calibrated messages. It is a story about how wars are prevented, not just by military deterrence, but by the hard work of people who build bridges across seemingly unbridgeable divides. When historians look back at this era, they will ask why the war between America and Iran that so many people expected did not happen. Part of the answer will be luck. Part of the answer will be the caution of leaders on both sides. But part of the answer will be the channel that remained open when all other channels were closed, the messages that flowed through Islamabad when they could flow nowhere else, the bridge that Pakistan built and maintained even when the storms of conflict threatened to wash it away. This is Pakistan's secret contribution to global security. This is the role that few people understand, but that has shaped the world we live in. And this is why, when the next crisis comes, When America and Iran once again stare at each other across the precipice of war, the phone will ring again in Islamabad. Because some bridges are too important to let fall, and some secrets are too important to remain hidden forever. Now you know the truth. Now you understand what Pakistan has done and what Pakistan can do. The question is what comes next. Will America and Iran find a way to resolve their differences permanently? Will the channel that Pakistan has maintained lead eventually to a real peace? Or will the tensions continue to simmer, waiting for the next spark that could ignite a conflagration? The answer is not yet written. The future remains uncertain, but one thing is clear. What's in a world of conflict and division, the nations that can build bridges, that can talk to all sides, that can find common ground where others see only differences, these nations will shape the future. Pakistan has shown that it can be such a nation. The question now is whether the world will recognize this potential and support it, or whether it will remain a secret weapon deployed in moments of crisis but never fully acknowledged or appreciated. The choice is ours. The future is unwritten. And the bridges that will carry us into that future are being built today in quiet conversations, in trusted relationships, in the patient work of diplomacy that never makes headlines but that saves lives beyond counting. This is the story of how Pakistan became America's secret weapon. This is the story of how one nation, often dismissed and frequently criticized, stood between two giants and helped prevent a war. And this is the story that reminds us all that in the darkest moments, when all seems lost, there are always those who work in the shadows to bring back the light. Remember this story. Share this story, because the world needs to know that peace is possible, that bridges can be built, and that even the most bitter enemies can find a way back from the brink. Pakistan showed us this in January 2020, and Pakistan continues to show us this every day in ways that most of us will never see, but that shape the world we live in more than we can possibly imagine. This is not fiction. This is not propaganda. This is history, hidden in plain sight, waiting to be understood. Now you understand. Now you know. And now the question is what you will do with this knowledge.